An entire city rests silently on the ocean floor, built upon a foundation of 50,000 human sacrifices. This is not a myth, but one of history's most disturbing and puzzling archaeological finds. We are about to journey into the dark heart of an ancient civilization to uncover why they performed such extreme rituals and what catastrophic force sent their city to a watery grave. By the end, you will understand the terrifying beliefs that can lead a society to destroy itself. We will explore who these people were and what desperate fear could justify such an immense offering. What does it take for an entire culture to believe that death is the only path to survival? A single trawler net snagged on something impossible far below the surface. When the fishermen hauled it up, they found not rock or wreckage, but a carved stone face, its eyes wide and mouth open in a silent scream. That was the first clue. Soon, sonar scans painted a breathtaking picture of the seafloor, revealing a sprawling grid of streets and the stark outlines of pyramids swallowed by the deep. The scientific community met the initial reports with profound disbelief. A city of that scale could not exist in such deep, uncharted waters, yet the evidence was undeniable. Expedition teams descended into the crushing darkness, their lights illuminating a necropolis preserved in a cold, timeless silence. They mapped a grand plaza centered around a massive, stepped platform. The first samples brought back from these stone altars revealed dark, iron-rich stains and residues of plant-based compounds unknown to modern science. But the true horror, the discovery that would define this site forever, came from the sediment cores. The seabed around the city was not just sand and rock. It was a thick layer of human bone, a geological stratum of the dead. Initial estimates, based on the sheer density of remains across the city's footprint, pointed to a single, staggering number. 50,000 souls. This was not a burial ground, it was a killing field on an unimaginable scale. Deciphering the identity of this lost people begins with the stones they left behind. The city's layout reveals a society utterly consumed by its faith. Wide ceremonial avenues all lead directly to the central pyramid, a structure dwarfing every temple and dwelling around it. This was not a city designed for commerce or community, but for ritual. Power was clearly concentrated in the hands of a religious elite, a priestly class who lived in opulent compounds adjacent to the main altar, separated from the common populace. They alone could interpret the will of the gods, and they alone dictated the terrifying price for divine favor. So what deity demanded such a horrific tribute? The evidence points not to a benevolent sun god, but to a far more immediate and terrifying force, the ocean itself. Carvings recovered from the central pyramid, though weathered, consistently show a monstrous, serpentine entity rising from waves, its maw open toward depictions of kneeling human figures. This was not a distant celestial being, but a primal god of the deep, a force of nature given a conscious, hungry will. The people of this city lived with the ocean not just as a source of life, but as a perpetual, looming threat. Their entire worldview was likely built upon a simple, terrifying equation: sacrifice or be swallowed. This belief system would have been the very bedrock of their civilization, the glue that held their society together and the engine of its ultimate destruction. When faced with a crisis, their response was preordained by their cosmology. A prolonged drought that parched their crops, a series of violent earthquakes that shattered their buildings, or the ominous tremors of a nearby volcano. Any of these would have been seen as a sign of the ocean god's wrath. The priests would have proclaimed that the cosmic balance was broken, that the pact between the people and the deity had been violated. The only solution, the only way to restore order and prevent the land from sinking into the abyss, was to make the ultimate offering. Can you envision the terrifying logic? They were not killing to be cruel, they were sacrificing to save everyone else. They believed that by sending 50,000 souls into the depths, they were anchoring their entire world, buying its continued existence with a currency of blood and bone. This was a society so gripped by a desperate fear of annihilation that it chose to participate in its own partial destruction, hoping to stave off a complete one. The bones themselves tell a story of a systematic and terrifyingly efficient process. Forensic analysis reveals a chilling demographic cross-section of the city's own population. These were not enemy soldiers or foreign slaves. The remains belong overwhelmingly to young adults, both men and women in the prime of their health. There is a startling absence of the elderly, the very young, or individuals with significant physical impairments. This was a calculated culling of the society's most vital members, its strength and its future. The method of their death is written upon their skeletons. While some show signs of sharp force trauma, the predominant evidence points to a far more controlled and ritualistic method. A specific repeated fracture pattern is found at the base of many skulls, consistent with a single, precise blow from a heavy, ceremonial weapon. This was not a frenzied massacre. It was a clinical, orderly execution. We can begin to reconstruct the final somber procession. The wide avenues, once thought to be for grand parades, were instead the paths to a sanctioned slaughter. Imagine the silent lines of chosen individuals, perhaps believing their sacrifice was a sacred duty, walking voluntarily from the city's outskirts towards the central pyramid. They would have passed the opulent homes of the priests who condemned them, climbing the steep stone steps to the altar platform under the watchful eyes of the entire city. At the summit, the air would have been thick with the smoke of burning, unknown herbs, the very residues found on the altar stones. Each victim would have been positioned, and in one swift, practiced motion, their life was extinguished. Their bodies were then cast from the high platform into the deep channels that fed directly into the sea, a final offering to the god of the deep. This discovery forces us to confront a profound ethical dilemma. How do we judge a civilization that committed such a profound act of self-destruction in the name of survival? These were not monsters. They were people gripped by a collective, existential fear, so powerful that it overrode the most fundamental human instinct to protect one's own. The true horror of this sunken city is not just the scale of the death, but the love and the faith that may have accompanied it. Parents may have offered their children, and communities may have celebrated those chosen, seeing them not as victims but as saviors. This belief system, so alien to us, was the very fabric of their reality. It held their world together until the moment it collapsed into the sea. What final cataclysm could have convinced them that even 50,000 lives were not enough? The ground beneath their feet, the very foundation of their world, ultimately betrayed them. Geological evidence points to a sudden and violent end, a cataclysm that struck with little warning. Core samples taken from the city's ruins reveal a clear, dramatic sequence. A layer of normal soil and construction debris is abruptly capped by a thick deposit of sand and marine shells, a clear sign of a massive, single-event saltwater inundation. This was not a slow, creeping rise of the sea. This was an ocean that arrived in a single, terrifying surge. The structural damage supports this, with massive stone walls toppled in a uniform direction, as if pushed over by an immense directional force. The most compelling theory is a megathrust earthquake, so powerful it dropped the entire coastal shelf dozens of feet in an instant. This seismic collapse would have generated a tsunami of unimaginable scale, a wall of water that first drained the coastline, then rushed back in to permanently claim the land. In a matter of minutes, the city of Sacrifice was swallowed whole. Another possibility is a phenomenon called liquefaction, where violently shaken, water-saturated soil instantly loses its strength and behaves like a liquid. The stone pyramids and temples built to last for eternity would have become impossibly heavy, sinking into the suddenly unstable ground as if into quicksand. The city literally dissolved beneath its own weight. But there is a third, more haunting theory that lingers in the shadows of this discovery. What if their final, desperate act of sacrifice was the very thing that doomed them? Could the immense concentration of death, the spiritual weight of 50,000 souls offered at once, have been the trigger? We know from the sediment layers that the sacrificial event and the city's submersion happened in very close succession. Perhaps the final ritual was an attempt to appease the ocean god in the face of foreseen tremors. In their fervor to control the forces of nature, they may have unknowingly sealed their fate. The ground, saturated with blood and shaken by the constant marching of processions, could have been primed for collapse. The poetic and terrifying justice is inescapable. A city built on death was ultimately consumed by the very element it sought to placate. The ocean god they feared did not just take their offerings, it took everything. This silent city beneath the waves leaves us with a profound and chilling legacy. We began with a single, screaming stone face pulled from the deep, which led to the mapping of a vast, sunken metropolis. We came to understand a civilization ruled not by kings or commerce, but by a desperate faith in a vengeful ocean god. The grim reality of 50,000 sacrificial victims, chosen from their own healthiest and strongest, reveals a society that believed it could buy its survival with the lives of its people. And finally, we see the cataclysm that ended it all, a sudden geological collapse that may have been triggered by the very rituals intended to prevent it. This story is a stark lesson in the extremes of human belief, demonstrating how the powerful force of collective fear can drive a culture to perform the unthinkable. It shows us the fragile line between a thriving civilization and utter catastrophe, a line that can be erased in an instant by nature's power or by our own terrified actions. So we are left with one final haunting question. Does the sunken city of 50,000 represent a dark anomaly in the human story, a one-time descent into madness? Or is it a stark mirror reflecting the terrifying capacities that lie within all of us when faced with existential dread? What do you believe was the final, decisive factor that sealed this city's fate? Share your own theories in the comments below and subscribe to join us as we continue to uncover history's greatest mysteries.